A former cast member just revealed what nobody knew about Romper Room. The show wasn't really about education. It was about selling toys. Children were basically unpaid advertisers on live television. Hosts had secret signals to handle kids who broke down on camera. Some cities ran completely different versions with no safety rules. And the famous magic mirror was all fake by the end. The woman who trained every single host kept strict control over a business empire worth millions. But when the truth started coming out, everything fell apart. What she built wasn't a classroom. It was something much more disturbing. In 1953, a woman named Nancy Claster sat watching a group of kindergartners in Baltimore struggle with traditional classroom learning. It didn't feel right to her. Something was off. Nancy wasn't a psychologist or a big TV executive. She was just someone who deeply understood how children think. Born Nancy Goldman in 1915, she married Bert Claster in 1938, and together they would go on to change children's television forever. They didn't invent a cartoon or a silly puppet show. What they created was much more daring. Nancy had an idea that no one took seriously at first. She wanted to put actual 4- and 5-year-old kids on live television. Not trained actors, real children, and she wanted to teach them right there in front of the camera. Her idea became Romper Room, the first preschool show where children weren't just watching, they were part of it. Nancy believed something very simple but powerful. She said kids like to watch kids, and she was right. Other networks thought it would fail. They didn't believe children could focus on a show for 30 to 60 minutes. But Nancy proved them completely wrong. Her idea didn't just catch on, it exploded. Romper Room was broadcast in 25 countries. Families in the United Kingdom, Japan, Brazil, and Australia were all watching children just like theirs. But they didn't know what was really going on behind the scenes. What looked like a sweet classroom on TV was actually a carefully built business empire. Every local station that aired Romper Room had to meet strict rules. Nancy herself trained every single host. They were all called Miss Something, like Miss Nancy, Miss Sally, Miss Fran. And every one of them had to be a certified teacher. No exceptions. From 1953 until 1983, Nancy personally shaped hundreds of these women into the perfect children's show hosts. She gave them exact scripts, exact behavior rules, and even exact ways to speak. If a station wanted the rights to broadcast Romper Room, they had to buy the full package. That meant merchandise, ads, and that smiling Jack-in-the-Box logo. At its peak, the Romper Room franchise was in 150 cities. Nancy and Bert Claster retired in 1975 as millionaires. They had figured out something no one else had. Companies were willing to pay huge amounts just to reach preschool children. No other network had even tried. The original show aired from Baltimore's WB-TV. But this wasn't just a studio. It became something like a live lab for child behavior. Nancy came up with a system called Doob and Don't Be. Mr. Doobie was a big bumblebee who showed children how to behave well. Mr. Don't Be showed what not to do. It sounds simple now, but in the 1950s, this was a huge deal. Back then, most discipline for children was based on punishment. Nancy's system was about positive reinforcement. And the most surprising thing was that she had no formal training in psychology. She was just watching children and noticing what worked. The Doobie system became so popular that child experts began studying it. The studio turned into something like an unplanned research center. Kids even got Doobie balloons that buzzed when you let them go. It made the lessons fun and unforgettable. But live TV with real children isn't like a cartoon. There were no scripts for the kids. And that's where the chaos came in. Nancy wanted each group of children to rotate every 2 months. These kids were 4 or 5 years old, and anything could happen during filming. Some cried, some ran off camera, some just stared at the lights. The show wasn't polished. It was raw and real. That's what made it special. But it also made it a nightmare for producers. By 1959, the Baltimore waiting list had become so long that TV critic John Crosby joked that some kids wouldn't get on the show until they were 40 years old. That wasn't just a joke. It was actually happening. Parents would put their children on the waiting list before they were even born. When Edna Anderson Taylor left her local version at KSL-TV, there were over 3 years' worth of families still waiting for their chance. Some kids got to come back if they felt comfortable on camera, but most only got 1 or 2 weeks before being replaced. Every week brought new kids, new chaos, and new surprises. And that's what kept it alive. What most people never knew was how strict the casting process really was. Not every child could be on Romper Room. Before a child was accepted, they went through mental health evaluations. These tests weren't casual. Producers needed to know if a child could handle bright studio lights, separation from parents, and being watched by thousands of strangers through a screen. If a child was too shy or too hyper or couldn't follow directions, they were rejected. Many were turned away for simply having too much energy. This show wanted children who were calm, focused, and comfortable on camera. The producers were looking for a very specific kind of child, even if they never said it out loud. It was all based on 1950s ideas of discipline and control. And it wasn't just the kids. Becoming a Romper Room host was even harder. Every host had to be a certified teacher. That was the easy part. They also had to pass personality tests. For example, Miss Fran from Wichita was chosen out of 800 people. She had to go through 4 rounds of interviews. One of them included pretending to teach an invisible classroom. The producers were looking for someone who felt warm, but also in control. She had to manage unpredictable kids, deliver ad lines naturally, and make it all feel calm and happy. Once someone was selected, they flew to Baltimore. There, they spent 2 full weeks training directly with Nancy. They learned the exact structure, wording, and rhythm of the show. Anyone who couldn't meet those high expectations was sent home. But even with all this control, there were wild differences depending on where you watched the show. Romper Room wasn't just one show. It was many. Some stations, like Los Angeles and New York, made their own versions with their own hosts and different kids. Others followed Nancy's format very closely. A station in San Antonio even translated the scripts into Spanish. For many families, moving from one city to another meant watching a completely different version of Romper Room. It confused viewers, especially parents who thought it was all the same. Even though the name stayed the same, the experience didn't. That's the danger of franchising. It grows wide, but not always consistently. One of the most magical parts of the show was the magic mirror. Every day, the host would hold up a mirror frame and say the famous rhyme. Romper, bumper, stomper, boo. Tell me, tell me, tell me, do magic mirror, tell me today. Did all my friends have fun at play? And then she would name real children. But what people didn't realize was how much work went into that moment. Before each show, the host would go through hundreds of letters from children all over the country. Parents would write in their kids' names, hoping for just one mention. The host had to memorize dozens of names from memory and say them clearly on air. Forgetting a name meant breaking a child's heart. Some hosts created memory tricks just to keep up. It wasn't just cute, it was pressure. Pure emotional pressure that felt deeply personal for millions of young viewers. By 1965, Romper Room had quietly become the most widespread children's show on television. But it didn't work like most other shows. Instead of one version being shown across the country, more than 100 local stations each created their own version, with their own local host. These weren't just copies. Each city had its own Miss Nancy or Miss Molly talking to children like they were right there in the room. In big cities like Los Angeles and New York, they didn't even bother with the national feed. They filmed their own episodes from scratch. And what made it even more surprising was that it went international. Romper Room was soon seen in Canada, the United Kingdom, Japan, the Philippines, Finland, New Zealand, Puerto Rico, Paraguay, Australia, Papua New Guinea, Argentina, and Greece. The demand was so high that parents signed up their kids before they were even born. In Baltimore, the waiting list got so long that some children wouldn't get on the show until they were 40 years old. That's what a 1959 report by critic John Crosby said. It was unheard of. But this wasn't just about fun. The show earned the government's trust. It worked with the President's Council on Physical Fitness and Sports. The group first started by President Eisenhower in 1956, when President Kennedy renamed it in 1963. The show started including official games and exercises approved by the council. In April of that year, those fitness routines aired for the first time on Romper Room. The Department of Education even backed the program, saying it wasn't just TV, it was a real educational tool. Parents and teachers started trusting the show in a new way. People no longer thought of it as just entertainment. They saw it as something close to an actual kindergarten classroom on TV. That trust helped Romper Room build something even bigger, a massive line of products. Kids didn't just watch the show. They lived in its world even after it ended for the day. There were toys, games, and lunch plates all tied to the show's characters. The doobie alone turned into a symbol kids recognized everywhere. There were doobie plates, educational toys, and even those plastic romper stompers kids walked on around the house. Because every local station that made their own show also got the rights to sell these items. It turned into a multi-million-dollar business. It became one of the first children's shows that didn't just make money from ads. It sold a lifestyle. And with the show reaching other countries, those products showed up in stores around the world. This mix of local TV, government backing, and global toys helped Romper Room last from 1953 all the way to 1994. That's 41 years of children growing up with the same smiling teacher calling out their names through the TV screen. There was also serious academic support behind the show. Big names like Johns Hopkins Medicine and the Kennedy Krieger Institute supported the methods used in Romper Room. The Kennedy Krieger Group focused on child development and worked closely with Johns Hopkins University, which had its own Institute for Education Policy. These weren't just medical groups. They were helping shape how children learned. Their support gave Romper Room another layer of respect. It wasn't just a popular show, it was backed by science. But in 1962, something happened that nearly shattered the entire image. In Phoenix, a local host named Sher Chesson, known to viewers as Miss Sherry, took 36 pills for morning sickness while pregnant with her 5th child. She didn't know those pills contained thalidomide, a drug that had been causing horrifying birth defects across Europe. The pills had been brought home by her husband, Bob Finningbine, a high school teacher who had just returned from a long 10-week trip to Europe with 40 students. He had picked them up in London, where thalidomide was still being sold over the counter at the time. No warnings, no labels, no one to tell them what would happen next. By 1962, thalidomide had already been linked to thousands of babies being born without arms, hands, or legs. Some had fins instead of limbs. The drug had never been approved in the United States, but Bob's innocent purchase turned into a national crisis. When a doctor confirmed what they feared, the couple faced an impossible decision. Arizona law only allowed abortion if the mother's life was in danger. To get permission, they needed 3 doctors to agree. Sherry and Bob decided to warn other parents. So, she spoke to a local newspaper on July 23, 1962. She asked to stay anonymous. The story ran with "The title pill may cost woman her baby." But just 3 days later, the same newspaper printed another headline. "In abortion case, mother TV star here," and gave out her name and home address. Her life changed instantly. Reporters swarmed their home in Scottsdale. Protesters showed up on their lawn. Her TV station fired her immediately, saying she wasn't fit to be on a children's program anymore. She had hosted the show for 3 years. She had won awards. Now she was out. Life magazine captured the moment in a heartbreaking photo. Sherry was sitting on the floor hugging her kids while chaos unfolded outside. The backlash became national. Death threats flooded in. The FBI had to protect her family. One letter said her children deserved to die. 2. A preacher from Chicago warned her that God's punishment was coming. Reporters followed her everywhere. FBI agents had to escort her children. Even the Vatican condemned her decision, turning her into a global target. Arizona's county attorney smirked when asked if he'd press charges. He said, "Maybe." He said it with a grin. With no legal way out in the US or even in Japan, Sherry had to go to Sweden. She flew out wearing a blonde wig, dark glasses, and a fake pregnancy belly to hide from cameras. She landed in Stockholm on August 5, 1962. A team of 10 doctors from the Royal Swedish Medical Board took 3 weeks to make their decision. On August 18, 1962, the procedure was done. The doctor later confirmed that the baby would not have survived. Its body was just a near limbless torso. The media followed every step of her time in Sweden. It wasn't just a medical trip. It had become the most public abortion story in the world. 30 years later, HBO turned it into a movie. A Private Matter starring Sissy Spacek and Aidan Quinn premiered on June 20, 1992, brought the story back into the spotlight, and reminded America of how one woman's private, medical choice became a public battleground. What happened to Sher Chesson changed the way people saw children's television, pregnancy rights, and public morality. Romper Room never fully recovered from that shock. But it also never disappeared. For 41 years, it kept showing up on screens around the world, quietly shaping the way generations of children learn to play, listen, share, and be kind. In 1979, 5-year-old Leonardo DiCaprio was brought on to the Los Angeles version of Romper Room, a popular children's show that had already been running for over 25 years. It was his favorite show, and his mother got him on as a treat. But almost immediately, something went wrong. Instead of quietly participating in the educational segments, Leonardo began causing complete chaos. He ran up to the live cameras, stared into the lens, and smacked them. He jumped around the stage doing flips that no one asked for. The show was supposed to teach manners and basic learning skills, but Leo turned it into his personal playground. According to DiCaprio, the crew couldn't control him. He once said, "I remember running up to the camera, looking into it, and slapping it." In another interview, he said, "They had to sit me down multiple times. When the host cheerfully announced, 'Hey kids, it's story time,' Leo screamed, 'Yeah,' at the top of his lungs, completely drowning her out. He even tried to pull his mother onto the set. By the end of the taping, the staff had seen enough. DiCaprio always described it as being fired. He was just 5 years old and already kicked off television. But years later, the host of that episode, Sokohu Sakano, said something very different. She told PBS in 2013 that the show never removed children. If a kid was being disruptive, they simply moved them out of the camera's view and continued filming. She specifically brought up Leonardo's story to say the firing never happened. According to her, no matter how wild the kids were, no one got kicked out. They just shifted them to a quieter corner and focused the camera elsewhere. That contradiction opened a new question. Did DiCaprio exaggerate his story? Did he turn a simple redirection into a rebellious legend? The answer might be yes. When he appeared on The Late Show with David Letterman in 1995, he said he was fired, but never mentioned being physically removed. A People magazine piece in 1998 said he was booted off the set. But that seems to be more interpretation than fact. He never actually said the words, "I was kicked off." It's possible that the real story was just a chaotic little boy being gently sidelined by a host. trained to deal with wild 4 and 5-year. But by the time DiCaprio became famous in the 1990s, the story had become Hollywood folklore. There's a reason it stuck. The producers of Romper Room had special procedures in place just for moments like this. Kids misbehaving on live TV wasn't rare. There were backup plans, emergency signals, and tricks that hosts used to handle everything without cutting to commercial. One host remembered a meltdown in 1977 when a boy named Billy started crying during the Pledge of Allegiance and refused to continue. There were no commercials to escape to. The host had to fill the dead air while trying to calm him down. Live with no script. That pressure was intense. Camera operators learned secret hand signals so the hosts could tell them to shift focus away from kids who were about to lose it. Psychologists were even on standby, watching from behind the cameras. These were trained professionals who could step in if a child broke down or couldn't handle the pressure of being filmed. The lights, the strangers, the constant directions. It was too much for many young kids. Even the best behaved ones had off days. But Leo wasn't just an AF-day kid. His behavior was so memorable that even decades later, the host still remembered it clearly. That alone says a lot. And Leo wasn't the only wild card. This show had to deal with all sorts of awkward moments. Preschool crushes, for instance, were a constant headache. Sometimes 4 and 5-year-olds would form attachments to each other and then refuse to participate in group activities unless they were next to their boyfriend or girlfriend.